Hello, and thank you for being here with me. The first thing I want to say to you as you settle in to listen to this presentation and hopefully have some fun and learn something is that you belong here. And you can interpret that however you want. I think that it's so important for us to have the internal sense that we belong in our lives, whatever that means to you. You belong in your life. You belong on this planet. You belong in this time. You belong here. Having this internal sense within us that we belong is sort of the foundation that sets the tone for us to be able to be an active participant in our lives, to be an active participant in the world, to make things better for ourselves and for the people around us. What I am doing here today is presenting for you guys, everyone out there in the virtual world, a talk that I gave in September of 2018 at the Light and Love Tarot Conference in Montreal, Canada. The title of the talk is Finding a Sense of Belonging with Tarot. And I wanted to do the talk again so I could go into a bit more depth, and also so that those of you who couldn't be there in person and are interested in this can get to hear what I have to say. So with this topic, I am going to talk more about what belonging actually means, and I'm going to go over 3 specific ways that you can use tarot to tap into a sense of belonging. And now I get to share with you guys this beautiful slideshow that I made. So here again is the title of the presentation, Finding a Sense of Belonging with Tarot. And I should mention, in case you are not familiar with me, my name is Carrie Mallon. You can find me at carriemallon.com or at Carrie Mallon on Instagram. The reason I'm so passionate about this topic is because I have long struggled to find my own sense of belonging. Ever since I was a kid, I felt a little bit out of place in this world. I really identify with the Page of Cups. I was always very imaginative, kind of intuitive, really sensitive, maybe even a little overly sensitive. And by the time I was a young adult, I had learned how to put on a sort of mask. So it's not exactly that I was being fake, but more that I learned how to hide the fact that I often felt so lonely and I often felt so uncertain about my path and my place in life. So I did all of the things I thought I should do, quote unquote, up until my early 20s. I got a college degree, I got a real job in the corporate world, yay. And on the outside, my life, I guess, looked pretty good, but on the inside, I did feel very out of place. I was having an existential crisis, sort of. There was this sense within me that there should be more to my experience, that I should feel more like I belonged within myself, that I belonged within my life on this earth, in this universe. But instead I was feeling really isolated. I was feeling anxious, and I always had this vague sensation that there was another way to live, but I hadn't quite found that way yet. And it was around this time that I discovered tarot. So I didn't know a lot about tarot at that point. I did have a friend who was into tarot. She had given me a few readings just for fun, but in my mind, it was, tarot was just this deck of cards that I guess you could tell fortunes with or whatever. So one day, out of nowhere, I had this jolt of inner knowing come forward. This burst of intuition told me to go get my own tarot deck. So, to make a very long story short, tarot has been a major key in me finding my own sense of belonging. The patterns that I see in the cards and that I saw in the cards when I started working with tarot have really helped me make sense of my inner world and my place in life. So, tarot, for the most part, I would say what tarot has done is help me feel like I don't actually need to be anything other than who I really am in order to belong. Tarot pointed out where I was living out of integrity and gave me the guidance and continues to give me the guidance that I need to start living a more expansive life, a life that's more in alignment with my true nature. So now that I read tarot professionally, I feel like one of the main things I do as a tarot reader is actually reconnect my clients with their own sense of belonging. So Brene Brown has a book called Braving the Wilderness, which is all about tapping into a sense of belonging. And in this book, Brene Brown talks about that right now in our culture on planet Earth, we are in somewhat of a cultural crisis of belonging. The reason this is a crisis is that when we as humans feel like we don't belong, we can be a danger to ourselves, to each other, and to the planet that we share. When you're out of touch with your own belonging, the symptoms can range from a vague sense of loneliness, kind of like I was describing that I was experiencing years ago, and they can range to full-blown depression and disconnection. This leads to a spiritual dis-ease that is counter to the way that we human beings are actually meant to live and meant to feel. I really believe that having a sense of belonging is essential to a life well lived. When you are in touch with your sense of belonging, you can see meaning and magic in your life. You feel at home with yourself, and in turn, you are more accepting and loving towards other people. So, this doesn't necessarily mean that when we are in alignment with belonging, we're necessarily blissful all the time. It doesn't mean we never struggle. But when you are in touch with your own belonging, you have this general sense of okayness. And as tarot readers, I think our work is really important right now because we can help people reframe their perspectives and reclaim the sense of belonging that is the birthright of every human being. And when tarot helps you or someone you're reading for tap into an awareness of belonging, that makes a huge difference on a personal scale. And I would say even on a global scale and on a universal scale, because everything is connected. You know, they say as above, so below, and the same goes the other way, as below, so above. So, tarot readers, I think, can help shift the energy of the collective towards an energy of belonging, and that is really beautiful and really vital work. Okay, so you've probably already gotten a pretty good picture of what I'm talking about when I say belonging, but obviously no slideshow is ever complete without a definition. So, here is how I have come to define belonging. Belonging is the awareness that you are whole and complete, and the awareness that you are an integral part of a bigger pattern, and the awareness of your true nature. One thing I want to point out right now, and this is something Brene Brown also points out in her book, is that fitting in is not the same thing as belonging. So you're not going to hear me talk very much in this presentation about how this applies in a social sense because it's not about meeting the status quo or necessarily being accepted by other people. Although those things are important, and of course, humans, we're social creatures and we need a sense of belonging with other people. The type of belonging that we're talking about here is not something that comes from an outside source. It's something that originates within your own center. So, fitting in is more of an outward thing. Belonging, in this sense, is more of an inward thing. Belonging is about being who you really are. Belonging is about authenticity and self acceptance. And as I'm sure many of you have experienced, not everyone will resonate with your authentic self, so you won't always fit in, but that's okay. You'll find the people who do resonate with that, and you can still have an internal sense of belonging regardless of how you're perceived by other people. Hopefully that makes sense. Okay, so now that we have talked about why belonging is essential, what belonging is, let's get into the heart of the talk and let's talk about some ways that tarot can help us and the people that we read for, if you read for other people, find a sense of belonging. I have found that this topic could be discussed endlessly. There are so many, probably infinite ways that tarot can guide us towards belonging. But as we all know, our time on this mortal realm and in this presentation is finite. So I have just picked 3 points to share with you, and I hope you find them useful in your own tarot practice. So here now we will go over 3 ways tarot can help you find a sense of belonging. Okay, so this is the first way, way number 1, that tarot can help you find a sense of belonging, and this is that tarot gives you a map of the human experience. So I mentioned this earlier when I felt called to get my first tarot deck. I didn't know a lot about the cards, so I found it kind of odd that I was so compelled to get a tarot deck, but I followed that inner guidance, and as it turns out, I'm very glad I followed that inner guidance. And as I started studying the cards, I began realizing that I had stumbled upon an incredible, unbelievable spiritual tool. I felt like I'd stumbled on something I couldn't believe could actually exist, but then I was finding it did exist in the unassuming form of a deck of cards. And that thing was none less than a map of the human experience. It's a pretty grandiose proclamation, but I imagine that a lot of you out there who have been working with tarot for some time, you know what I mean, that tarot does feel like a map of the human experience. I can honestly say, and I'm sure this is true for a lot of you, that I've never had a single experience in my life in either my inner realm or my outer realm that is not somehow mirrored in tarot. Any thought I've ever had, any situation I've ever been in, any inner struggle I've ever dealt with, no matter what I'm going through, no matter what you are going through, tarot affirms the existence and the validity of that experience. Now, this alone is such a huge thing because a major factor when we feel like we don't belong is that we feel isolated. Even if on maybe a logical level we know it's not true, we can feel like we are the only one who has ever gone through whatever we're dealing with. And that leads us to feeling like we don't belong, like our experiences are cut off from the broader cosmic patterns of the universe. So, when you or someone you are reading for is experiencing a lack of belonging, sometimes simply seeing your experiences mirrored in the tarot is enough to realign you with your sense of belonging. So, the specific manifestations of your circumstances, of course, are always unique, but tarot reminds you that they are part of this broader pattern, this broader human experience. Okay, so there are a lot of different ways that you might actually visualize the map the tarot deck creates. What I have up here on the screen is a layout that I first discovered from Rachel Pollack's classic book, one of my favorite tarot books, 78 Degrees of Wisdom. And this particular way of envisioning the map of the human experience just uses the majors. This is an image I made for my blog a few years ago, and so as you can see here, to visualize this map, you take the major arcana and you divide the cards into 3 rows with 7 cards in each row. And then the Fool stands alone as a sort of representation of you on your journey. I'm gonna have a drink of water. One moment. Okay. So, and then I have labeled here the way that I have come to think of the patterns at work in each row of this map. But again, this is really based off the descriptions in 78 Degrees of Wisdom. So I think of the first row as being associated with traditional human development. This row shows some of the classic themes associated with the journey from infancy to adulthood. And then I think of row 2 as being more associated with self-exploration and maturity. So in this part of the map, you're finding a deeper sense of identity, values, and exploring your inner world. And then the third row, I think of this as the cosmological significance part of the map. So this row is where you are exploring your place in the cosmos and perhaps viewing your life in more of a spiritual or more of a mythical sense. So these are just some general associations to guide you, but again, even here in with just the major arcana, I think you have a pretty comprehensive map of what it is to be human. Okay, so there are so many different exercises you could do using this particular map. And as I said earlier, sometimes all it takes is considering this map of the human experience and then realizing that your experiences are reflected here. Sometimes that alone is enough to connect you with a sense of belonging, but sometimes you might feel pulled to do a more concrete exercise using this map. So here is an exercise you can try for yourself or for someone you are working with. I call it the challenge and the guide. To do this exercise, first you would lay out the major arcana face up, just like you see them here in the picture, and then consider something you have been going through that is leading to some sense of isolation or disconnection, and we will call that your challenge. So I do this exercise by consciously selecting the cards to represent the challenge, but if you prefer, you could shuffle them and draw a card at random if you wanted to do it that way. So again, the way I do it, you would consciously select a card that you feel most ties into this challenge that you're experiencing. And if you're familiar with tarot, you might consider which area of the map your challenge seems to line up with, so you can be really intentional about what card you pick. So, as an example, sorry, I was pausing for a minute to look at my notes. As an example, so I was doing this exercise for myself a while back, and I felt like my sense of belonging was being challenged in on a really like deep spiritual level. I felt really ungrounded and uncertain of a lot of things, which, is a pattern. It's a pattern for me I've gone through a few times in my life. And so I figured that that theme would probably fit somewhere in that third row of cards, and I ended up picking the Tower to be my challenge card when I was doing this activity. And if you were guiding someone else through this activity and they didn't necessarily have that depth of familiarity with tarot, you can also have them just pick a card based on the imagery, or you could just pick a card based on the imagery. There's no rights or wrongs with how to do this. So the card that most speaks to you or the person that you are working with doesn't necessarily have to line up with a more traditional interpretation of the cards, if that makes sense. So in other words, don't worry too much about reading the map correctly. Whatever evokes something within you or something within the person you're working with, that is the right choice. So once you have selected the card that represents your challenge, you'll then want to keep that card near you. And next you are going to consciously select a card that you feel can be your guide, that can help guide you through this challenge. This is my favorite part of this exercise, and this requires you to very much tap into yourself, tap into your soul. So you might find it helps to soften your gaze as you're looking at the map and take a few deep breaths and ask your intuition what energy can guide me through this challenge towards an awareness of belonging. And once again, you might want to consider the terrain of the map. So in my example that I gave earlier, where I chose the tower to represent my challenge, my intuition actually guided me to the very next card on the map, which is the star. The star was my guide card. So at this point, you'll have your cards that represent both your challenge as well as your guide. And then I would recommend spending a few moments either writing, journaling, or even speaking aloud to yourself or having the person you're working with do the same about why you selected each card so that you can go deeper into what those cards mean to you at this time. Pay particular attention to the guide card, and a few questions, prompting questions you can ask about your guide card would be, how might this card serve me? What advice can I take from this card? And how can this card help me shift into a perspective of belonging? So sometimes going through the exercise up until this point, you'll already be sensing that shift taking shape within you, but you might find it's beneficial to continue working with your guide card for some period of time if your challenge is something that is ongoing. So you could spend time meditating with your card, doing more journaling with it, and just continuing to work with that card as you continue to work through this challenge and work towards your sense of belonging. Okay, so from here, we are actually going to change gears a bit. So if you have been falling asleep, if you have been getting bored, wake up because we're changing gears. Okay, so up here now on the screen, I have a meme. This is something I can't take credit for. I'm not sure who originally made this, but a while ago, this was making the rounds on Instagram, and it clearly seemed to resonate with a lot of tarot readers. So, of course, it says, what I thought tarot would be like. I can see the past, present, and future so clearly. What it's actually like, I just got called the bleep out by a deck of cards. And I think this is hilarious because tarot really does have an uncanny ability to call us out on our BS, doesn't it? So this is our way number two that tarot can help us find a sense of belonging, and it is that tarot will call you out on your BS. Your own BS. I just realized I was avoiding swearing because when I gave this speech at the conference, I didn't know if I would offend anyone. But now that I'm doing it on my own for my own blog, I guess I can just say, I can be really naughty and say bullshit. Okay. Okay, so tarot calls you out on your bullshit. And your own bullshit is one of the most common things that will block you from your sense of belonging. And this bullshit comes in various forms. Some of the myriad forms your bullshit can take is unconstructive stories you tell yourself, self destructive habits you keep enacting, limiting beliefs you have, and so on and so on. Pick your poison. Sometimes we don't even consciously realize we are harboring bullshit, and tarot is a good way to really bring those things to the surface. So, how does this all relate to belonging? Well, an integral part of belonging, if you recall the definition that I gave earlier, is the awareness that you are whole and complete. And it's hard to feel whole and complete if you are unwilling or unable to sit with certain parts of your inner world. It's also hard to feel whole and complete when you are stuck in destructive patterns, upholding tired habits, or enacting whatever other form your bullshit is taking on a given day. So, suffice it to say, again, your own bullshit is sometimes really the number one barrier to your sense of belonging. This is a tarot spread I created. I invite you to give it a try if it's something that resonates with you. I call this the Transcending Your BS Tarot Spread. And the three positions, as you can see here, card 1 represents what bullshit do I need to acknowledge. Card 2 gives some advice on how you might acknowledge it. And card 3 gives a message about what transformation is available through this process. So you're welcome to take a screenshot of this or jot it down and give this spread a try and see if you get something helpful from it. Okay, we have reached the third point, and this is the final point that I'm going to talk about with you during this presentation. So this is way number 3, tarot can help you find a sense of belonging, and it is that tarot connects you with your true nature. So something that doesn't work so well for encouraging belonging is defining your true nature by fleeting external roles. So for example, sometimes without people even realizing it, they link their sense of belonging to their job or their hobbies or some other role that they play in life. And I'm not saying that those types of things cannot help a sense of belonging. They certainly can be useful. But the thing is, again, those types of things are fleeting. They can change at any given moment. And if and when they do change, and you don't have any other way to conceptualize who you really are, what your true nature is, that can lead to a sort of crisis. So, again, these types of roles can be part of your true nature, but they are not the whole picture. There is more to your true nature, of course, than the roles you play in this earthly realm, and tarot can help you remember and also live by this truth. Instead of being so zoomed in on the micro, on these, these little aspects of your life, these fleeting things, tarot gives you a way to zoom out and take a broader perspective as you acknowledge your true nature. So, what am I even talking about when I talk about your true nature? Well, lots of different religions and philosophies will have a different answer to this question. And ultimately, of course, you define for yourself what your true nature is. But when I'm talking about your true nature here, what I'm talking about is how you view the bigger truth about yourself. Your true nature is essentially your highest vision of who and what you are. Here's a quote from Danielle Laporte. This is one of my favorite quotes. Can you remember who you were before the world told you who you should be? And I love this quote, and I think it's really appropriate for this conversation because to me, your true nature is who you were before the world told you who you should be. It's kind of the core of who you are that sometimes gets hidden away under all these superfluous layers that we put on. So, your true nature is also who you are without your own bullshit. Going back to what we talked about a moment ago. Being aware of and living in alignment with your true nature is a big part of living authentically. And living authentically, which is to say, actually knowing and actually being who you are to the greatest of your capability and upholding the highest vision of yourself, those are all essential to having a sense of belonging. This is a really huge, kind of ethereal, kind of spiritual topic, but I want to give you another concrete exercise that might spark you to realign with your true nature using tarot. So, this is a pretty simple exercise, but I found it to be really helpful and really powerful. Okay, so the first part of this activity asks you to give yourself some time to consider words that might describe your true nature. So I have some examples here of words that might resonate with you. Maybe you would want to choose one of these, or maybe another word will come forward for you. Maybe you'll have multiple words. For me, my true nature word that I always come back to is magical. So the aim here is finding a word that can serve as a symbol of how you view your highest and most authentic true nature. Once you have landed upon a word that resonates with you for your true nature, this is where tarot comes in. So you'll want to look through your deck. Again, I like to do this face up and choose a card that for you carries the energy of your true nature word. And once again, there are no rights or wrongs with this. It doesn't have to be about the traditional interpretation of a card, it's about what the card evokes within you. And once again, if you were facilitating this exercise for someone who isn't very familiar with tarot, you can absolutely ask them to pick a card just based on imagery. So once you have your word and you have your card, you can try putting the card somewhere you'll see it frequently. So for me, I have a little altar in my little home office where I sit and meditate, and that's where I would place my card. So maybe you place it on your own altar if you have one on your desk. You could even set a picture of your card as the wallpaper on your phone because let's be honest, most of us look at our phones more than we look at most anything else anyway. But the idea again is putting that somewhere you will see it frequently so that you can turn to that image to evoke your true nature, to reconnect you with your true nature whenever you start to feel wonky. And for me, one of the most effective ways to do this is to meditate with your chosen card and your chosen words. So if you have a meditation practice, you could work with that card, sit with the energy of that card, invite the energy of that card and of your true nature word to continue to come forward within you. I work with the philosophy that, again, going back to what we talked about earlier, with tarot being this map of the human experience, I feel like the energy of each tarot card already resides within each one of us, and meditating with a card is a way to consciously and subconsciously invite the energy of that card to come forward within you. It's already within you, but this is a way to really bring it more to the surface. And in turn, of course, that is inviting the energy of your true nature to come forward within you. The main idea with this exercise is taking your true nature from something that's really vague and something that's kind of hard to conceptualize into something that you can associate with both a verbal cue, so your word, as well as a visual cue, which is your card. So it just makes your true nature feel like something that is a bit easier to understand and to envision. Okay, so we are nearing the end of our time together, nearing the end of this presentation. And I do want to reiterate as we're wrapping up, I feel like there's so much to say on this topic, so many ways we can use tarot to talk about what belonging is and how we can affirm our own sense of belonging. So it's such a huge topic. It's something that's really nuanced and very personal for each of us. But I hope you got at least something here that was useful for you. And I hope that this topic is something you can continue to explore for yourself going forward. And I also want to say, I think I kind of talked about this earlier, but I think it's important to say that a sense of belonging is not always something you can just find and hold on to forever. At least for me, I've mentioned this a couple of times, but I have had several phases in my life where I go through having these periods of feeling kind of spiritually ungrounded, feeling disconnected from my sense of belonging. So it's a dance. It's not something that necessarily is solid and concrete all of the time, at least for me. So I find that sense of belonging and then I slip out of it and then I find it again and that's okay. It's all part of the journey and the journey looks different for each of us. So it will look different for you than it does for me. But I think of belonging that is something that is always there in the center of my being, in the center of your being. Sometimes it's harder than others to tap into that sense, but it's always there within us and I think it's important to remember that. And being intentional about cultivating a sense of belonging within ourselves and within the people we work for, again, it really makes a big difference when we have these experiences where we feel kind of out of alignment with that sense of belonging. Tarot is always there. It's so comforting. We always can use tarot to realign with that belonging, and it just really means a lot to me. It's a really powerful tool. So that is what I have for you today. I talked about this earlier, but now we have my contact information up on the screen. If you want to say hi or have questions or whatever else, feel free to get in touch with me. And thank you again for being here. Take care of yourself.